Attention all personnel, this is the LTD conducting a launch status check. Verify ready to resume count and go for launch. VTC. VTC is go. USBC. Upper stages and booster.
You know, large cylindrical objects are my thing. But don't you think this is a bit much?
I couldn't help but fidget in my restraints behind a console of blinking lights and gauges. They obviously didn't have comfort in mind when they designed these seats, but some measure of amenity wouldn't have gone amiss, even in bulky pressure suits. I nudged the companion to my right. I couldn't see Nadari's face past the gold-coated sun visor protecting her eyes from the blazing tropical sun, flooding over her face through thick windows. Whatever the eyes of the world would be led to believe, in reality, I knew she was hiding her panicked expression from view.
Hey, come on, lighten up a little. This isn't so bad. What's the worst that could happen? Exactly everything?
Her feeble voice was almost inaudible through the helmet intercom. Right now, various images of explosions, pressure leaks, and high-speed disintegrations were probably playing in the timid woman's mind. I grasped her hand in comfort, and was shocked to feel her shaking even through the thick fabrics and lining.
You have to admit, though,
I continued without really missing a beat.
Thrust, vibration, restraints. This is right out of my playbook.
Another voice crackled through the radio.
Alpha 3, this is Launch Director. Please be aware that all transmissions are being recorded for historical and technical purposes, and this is being broadcast live, globally.
I stifled my curse as best as I could, but still received a whack to my faceplate from the left.
In layman's terms, shut up before you cause a PR disaster. Secure all loose items, including your libido.
Theana wasn't pleased, nor was she in the mood to deal with innuendos when literally an entire planet was watching.
Life of flight, CTC, clear caution, wanting memory, and verify no unexpected errors.
Theana followed her instructions and compared the readouts on her consoles to her checklist. Her response to the ground stations was almost robotic, like she had missed her calling in life as an autopilot system. Once the other rockets had checked in, the launch director returned once more over the headsets.
Life of Flight, Launch Director. We are working no problems at this time. I'd like to wish you all a nice voyage. Close and lock your visors and initiate O2 flow.
The craft's insides were eerily silent beyond the faint whirring of fans circulating the air and a distant hum of fuel pumps far below. The Capcom operator broke the silence.
Call check Life of 3.
CDR, loud and clear.
Theana nudged me to follow.
Spec 3, loud and clear.
I nudged Nadar to follow.
Prop 1, loud and clear.
Call check Life of
A
4.
light jolt bumped me in my seat as the rocket was transferred over to internal power, and the erector arms pulled away. A green light flashed in front of Theana as she confirmed the sequence over the radio, following two of her astronauts.
Liafa 1 on internal power. Liafa 2 internal power.
Life of 3 is on internal power.
A fourth craft announced the same, as the row of 4 launch vehicles began their final checks for flight.
CBG 1 through 4, motion nominal.
With the retraction of the boarding gantry, I wasn't getting out of this now. Although, the restraint harness probably had something to do with it too. The flight director's voice once again resonated through the earpieces, calling for the crews to verify vehicle startup. Each crew took their turn, but the channel was silent once it reached our turn. I was quickly jabbed in the arm and, realizing the significance, I passed the poke along as rapidly as I could. Nadari snapped out of her pre-flight panic, just long enough to meekly shout.
Life of 3 is in startup. Computer has control of the vehicle.
Her voice trailed off into a squeak. I could hear the repressed chuckling from the next rocket down the line. At this point, all I could do was focus on my breathing. Pretty much the only thing I had control over at this point. The launch readiness poll in the background only reinforced this. Maybe Nadari's paranoia wasn't so unfounded after all.
T-minus 30 seconds.
At this point, my heart began to race, the full implications finally sinking in. Holy shit! They're gonna shoot me into space. Remembering, this time, to twist my suit communications dial to internal, I glanced over to Theana.
So, this is really happening, huh?
Yes, it is.
Nothing I can do to make you pull that abort lever?
The thought of explosive bolts and emergency rockets flinging the capsule into the air, only to parachute down in a tree or beach a short distance away, wasn't the most welcoming. but it would be far less terrifying than the trip I was about to take. Theana slowly turned to stare at me, and I was alarmed to see a smirk on her lips, a rare sight for the grumpy, by-the-book woman.
No,
She said, her grin only getting wider.
there isn't.
She was actually toying with me. I suppose it was payback for my earlier remarks, but even the light-hearted jab at my fears wasn't enough to put me at ease at this point.
T-10.
Damn. This part. The seconds ticked by increasingly slower and slower, and at about 3 eternities left to go, the liquid-fueled rockets roared to life far below us. The capsule began to shake, and, despite the sound suppression water system blasting the bottom of the pad with seawater, the cacophony of exploding propellant was nearly enough to shatter my eardrums.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Okay, now it was deafening. The main solid fuel booster ignited with a massive thud, and I was pressed back into my seat as the acceleration commenced. I could barely hear the ground crews report that all 4 crafts had cleared their respective launch towers, making use of the narrow orbital interception window that awaited us. Out the viewports, a shower of colorful flower petals rained around the craft as it blasted clear of its moorings. A set of air cannons providing the traditional send-off of the local islanders when travelers leave on long voyages.
Mission clock is operating. First stage propulsion is nominal.
Theana had to practically scream over the sound of the metal beast below us, caged and spewing hundreds of thousands of kilograms of thrust. Nadari was doing her best to maintain consciousness beside me as the G-load increased significantly. It only took a few moments for us to clear the launch tower, leaving a nice scorch mark along its red structure as the special coatings burned away. The shaking was almost unbearable as the layers of air were peeled back over the bullet-shaped nose of the craft.
Mach 1.
Theana shouted, almost perfectly in sync with the other pilots as the speed of sound was pierced. There was a slight, hard buffet as the rocket passed the supersonic barrier, a mere pebble in the path of the pinnacle of Veraton technical engineering. Nadari clutched my hand tighter as the shaking within the craft grew more and more violent. Frankly, I thought she would have more faith in the designs of her mentors, but even so, she was probably in tears behind that visor by now, begging for protection from any deity that could listen. Thankfully, soon after, our pilot had called out the first milestone of the launch. The second and most important moment of the launch followed as we passed the point of maximum dynamic pressure. The outer aeroshell of the craft groaned slightly before Theana's face lit up with a smile, and she poked my arm. Well, more like flopped her hand against the numerous multiplications of the force of gravity, and it happened to hit my arm.
And that's Max Q. It's all down range from here.
I would likely have been more excited if I could remember what she was talking about. I may have officially earned the title of astronaut, though my background was still in astromarine biology. Sure, there's astro in the title, but that doesn't mean I know what an astronaut is talking about. The next minute and a half was mostly spent subtly panicking as the realization of what I was doing sunk in once again. Space. That place where there's nothing. And they're sending me there. A loud ripping noise suddenly echoed above the rumbling of the rocket below us. I was startled, but Nadari's panicked hyperventilating had me more worried. A checklist in front of me had unvelcroed itself and was moments later clattering across my helmet.
What was that?
Nadari's fear-choked words neared to silence as they left her lips.
Nothing. Just a shopping list.
Theana couldn't help but smirk at my quip. Even she couldn't grump at the bond I shared with the engineer. I was about to reach for Nadari's hand in comfort once again, when a solid jolt made me thankful for the tight harness. Theana flipped a few switches on the console and announced to the ground stations that we had successfully completed something called the Miko 1 and separated the first stage of the rocket. Now, barely half the length we started out with, much to my disappointment. The second stage engine snapped to life and threw me back into my seat a second time. This was soon followed by Theana pressing another button and sending the escape shroud to wherever rocket components go to retire.
You can open your visors if you want.
Theana pulled back the glass shielding her face and tapped a few more buttons, then announced to the ground station we'd achieved a negative return. From here, it was orbit or bust. With the main fairing out of the way, I was finally able to see out the long window above me, and the sudden bright light flooding into the capsule interior made me think we'd bought a nice little farm. However, the view was truly heavenly. As the rocket arched into its trajectory over 100 kilometers above the ocean, I was greeted with a clear view of the waves below, the clouds broken into tiny white dots of cirrocumulus. Although they seemed to pass by slowly, a quick glance at the velocity gauges made me question if traffic police could even ticket me for quintuple-digit speeds. Theana's voice snapped me out of my trance as I sat hypnotized by the view.
Cinco, ranges to life of flight, 1450 meters, 2220 meters, 4310 meters, adjusting for formation.
There was no denying Theana's skill as a pilot. Even in a bulky pressure suit, she quickly guided our craft to within 100 meters of the leading capsule. Another clunk followed as the final stage of the rocket fell away to a fiery end across the top of the atmosphere.
Don't take your suit off yet.
Her voice was authoritative. She knew Nadari wouldn't even blink right now without permission. But I was a bit of a different story.
We still have another minor correction burn coming up in 15 minutes.
I sighed and wiggled in my suit as much as I could in a vain attempt to get comfy.
So, all that was just foreplay?
Is that all you ever think about?
I pouted, closing my locker with a dull metallic clang, and turned to face Nadari. She clearly overheard my latest conquest. The look in her eyes of exhaustion and humor were a huge giveaway. No, I think about a lot of other things too. Like nosy friends poking at my love life. With a large stick.
You have the numbers of every single member of the Shinty team.
I couldn't hide the fact that my cheeks were starting to flush a bit.
And the entire stool ball team.
The blush began to seep to the rest of my face.
And the quarterstaff team.
I get it, okay? I buried my face in the textbooks and took off briskly down the hall. Well, as well as I could on my new leg. I limped and stumbled on the prosthetic several times, and nearly tripped as I wove through the crowd of students. Nadari had no issue keeping up with me.
Careful with that! It still isn't quite finished yet!
Before she could finish her sentence, I had barreled straight into a sophomore, spilling my books across the hall and pulling the young man to the ground with me as I fell. His hair was the color of autumn leaves, and his eyes were bluer than mine. I took a deep breath as I looked into them, like stepping into the warm light of a hot summer's day. I tried to remain calm, defaulting to my well-used tactic of defenseless princess to try to win his heart. By this point, Nadari had arrived behind my prey inside, having seen this play out dozens of times. A few sighs, a little eyelash fluttering, and I'd be swept away in his big, strong arms. The perfect way to escape the naggy engineering student.
I'm so sorry.
The hunk stammered, his heart clearly melting at the sight of me.
I didn't see you. Are you okay?
I was just about to begin one of my several monologues about how it wasn't his fault, that I had weak knees or some other cliche right out of a movie. But then, as his eyes drifted over my body, they fixed on my leg, or lack thereof, jutting out from under my skirt. I hesitated, but by that point, it was too late. The damage was done, and his expression morphed briefly into one of discomfort, and then back to concern. Concern laced with pity. Not concern that he had bruised an honest-to-God's angel come into the world.
Here, let me get that for you.
He scuttled quickly to his feet and offered me a hand, but Nadari was already helping me up. She must have seen my face change as I took in the pity on his. No, it's fine. I huffed quietly, gathering my scattered notes and limping away on my prosthetic as fast as it could carry me. By the time Nadari had finally caught up with me, I was on a bench in a more secluded part of the academy's courtyard. We sat there for what seemed like a small eternity, without speaking a word. I was afraid that doing so would unplug the dam of emotions I'd been holding back for days. I simply waited for my nerves to calm. I took a deep breath. Right as I was about to feel safe again, and Nadari spoke up.
It's not your fault. People just aren't used to this sort of thing.
She placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, but I was quick to pull away. Do you mean them or me? I snapped back. I could feel the tears welling up, and I could have held them back if I didn't open my eyes. Once again, I was greeted with the sight of my leg, missing from mid-thigh and replaced with plastics and aluminum tubes. It's not like it's some simple blemish I could hide with makeup. It's a whole damn leg. People notice. I notice. Every damn day. I'd only been back to the academy for a few weeks, and I'd already noticed how people saw me differently. Not as some goddess of beauty to be admired and adored. Not as the former model who gave up fame for the faceless world of academics. But as a mortal person. And one they could ignore at that. The angel who bleeds. You should have left me there. Nadari was quick to pick up on my feelings, as ever. That high society training. And now, I was partially one of her precious machines. That she could just look at, touch, and fix. I resented that feeling.
I don't like watching my friends get crushed under piles of rocks.
Her voice was soft and laced with hidden pain as she remembered that day. That expedition. That cave. Pain I'd never heard her talk about. And I don't like being an amputee. I began to sob. I wasn't sure anymore if it was because of my life being turned upside down or because I was right now yelling at the best friend I've ever had, who saved my life and given me a way back into it. She didn't seem to care. She may be scared of many things, but I wasn't one of them.
You're still you, no matter how many limbs you have.
That just made me madder, as if I'd sprung an extra leg or a tail or something. Nice one! I jeered, glaring at her. Tell me another cliché. Tell me it's for the best. Tell me about the time your cousin broke her arm and had to miss the canoe trip she really didn't want to go to anyway. Tell me it's all in the plan of the gods. Okay, that one had been a low blow. Nadari had taken her family's shallow, showy faith and made something quiet and deeply personal from it. She never once forced her beliefs down my throat. Even when I ranted about the way religious beliefs, like the ones my own parents had, held back our planet and the sciences, she held her tongue. She'd never admit it, but I think she agreed with me. She just had another way of fighting the problem of ignorance. She shrugged, half smiling. As mad as I was, she looked smug.
What's there to say, Rhea? You just said it all. But don't tell me someone pulled that plan of the gods ridiculousness with you.
I nodded jerkily. My father... Both my parents think I'll drop out of the academy now. Come home and marry a nice man from the congregation. Not, of course, a young one. Maybe a widower with children, since he'll never want to have a physical marriage. I'm not a whole woman. I'm defective. I heard her gasp and felt her arm go around my shoulder.
They actually said that?
I nodded again. The day after the surgeon installed the leg, they thought I was napping.
Well, they're wrong. You're whole. 112%. Your value is in your mind and your soul, not your body. Your body is only a cage for your true self.
Something in Nadari's tone sounded like a brassy horn at the head of a troop formation, or bells ringing to warn of a fire. Except, I was the fire, the ammunition.
You can go into hiding, wither away, but then they'd win. You don't like to let other people win. You didn't let Pari win when she cheated off you in rhetorical comp. You didn't let your mother win when you insisted on coming to the academy with the money for the modeling contracts. And you didn't let a pile of chert and limestone win. So don't you dare let a fairy tale you don't even believe in keep you from winning your dreams.
Nadari smiled at me suddenly. I had no idea why until she nodded at the ground under me. Somewhere through her speech, I had jumped to my feet as if responding to the horns and bells. I was perfectly balanced, like I'd been born with Nadari's gift limb.
Like I said, I don't like watching my friends get crushed under piles of rocks. But I do like watching them overcome obstacles.
Lunch was upon us with a few short hours, and after a brief hunt for each other, Nadari and I joined up with the lunch line. I was about to select a packaged salad when a shrill laugh broke behind me, and I groaned. Go to hell, Pari. They missed you. I scowled, not even bothering to look over my shoulder at the wench. She had copied half my final project when we were freshmen, 2 years ago. A year ago, she discovered that her dream man, hearts and flowers and all, was pining after me.
Only because they can't feel anything when you bend over for them.
She leaned in to study the salad labels.
Can you even bend over anymore with that thing pretending to be a leg?
I was officially tired of crying over my leg being gone. I heard one of Nadari's bells ringing in my head, warning me not to let this overly indulged prat get the better of me. At least I have people wanting to bend me over for me. Not just because I might write something nice about them in some underappreciated magazine. She was a journalism major, and I knew she wanted to become some sort of reviewer.
At least people understand my job. Just what is astromarine biology anyways? It's quite the mouthful, but you have plenty of experience with that, don't you?
I was just about to take my leg off and beat the harlot to a pulpy goo when a cough caught my attention.
That'll be 2 silver, 25 copper, please.
In the heat of the moment, I'd entirely forgotten where I was standing, including lunch in hand. I quickly paid for my meal and slipped away while the hussy laughed at the brilliance of her remarks. Crushing her skull wasn't anywhere near worth expulsion. Nadari had already found a pair of seats in the busy commissary. It was hard to believe the posh family roots and high-class upbringing Nadari had come from, if you saw her at a glance. All covered in dust and grease, hair awry in directions that probably defied gravity and a few laws of physics. It would be even more impossible to believe if you saw her wolf down the burrito she considered a meal. You are the heiress of the Halifax fortune, right?
Not so loud! I know, not if I have anything to say about it. Besides, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to build neat things, like your leg.
She bit into another burrito, but nearly choked on it when the Academy's PA system pinged on.
Attention please. The presidential address will begin in 30 minutes in the front courtyard. All students and staff are reminded to not interfere with the press or their equipment. I'd like to not have a repeat of the senator's visit last summer. In addition, all those attending must, I emphasize, must, wear their proper school uniform. That is all.
Nadari immediately poked my arm.
You're coming too, right?
She said, her eyes almost lighting up. Isn't that guy your uncle or something? I couldn't help but jest at her family's extensive history in politics. She just rolled her eyes and waved a hand dismissively.
Only by marriage, but relations aren't the most important part. What's important is...
Here, she stopped and slyly looked around the cafeteria, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. She leaned in and dropped her voice.
I heard it's going to be some big announcement of a big project within the space agency.
I blinked. So did I. So did every tabloid on the planet. She grinned and leaned closer, shooting me a seductive smile that would normally be my job.
But it has something to do with a certain neighboring planet that shall remain anonymous.
It was a nightmare trying to squeeze through the crowd of students and curious locals just to find a seat that didn't require a telescope to view the speech. Nadari, normally quiet and reserved, and barely able to move a stack of paper without startling herself, was shoving and pushing her way through the crowd with me trailing in her wake, just to get the best available seats. Although she may scare at the drop of a hat, once something relating to her field was in question, she couldn't be stopped.
Ooh, right here!
She all but threw me into the row of uncomfortable cheap wooden seats organized across the vast academy courtyard. The school's security staff had been demoted to mere traffic control, as armed soldiers and members of the secret guard patrolled the grounds. I naturally didn't pass up the opportunity to oogle the brave men in uniform. Nadari was practically bouncing on her feet with excitement, and if I had a proper set of feet myself, I might be too with the amount of testosterone on the premises. The crowd rolled in quickly. Many were local businessmen and the press, but the majority were simply students, many representing the bright future of our nation, and some here because it got them out of classes. Like me. I was about to try and take a nap when the headmaster of the academy finally approached the podium.
Good afternoon. Today's program will begin with the singing of our national anthem.
I would have tried to get a bit of rest during this part if I weren't forced to stand, and withstand the school's frankly terrible brass section. Nadari, however, was having the time of her life. Finally, it ended. The bugle especially should have been put out of its misery. And the school chaplain offered a brief prayer to the gods. Then, the headmaster stepped back to the podium.
It is my honor to welcome you all on this auspicious day and introduce President Shasa of our great nation of Lonatara. Cerulean Forest Academy has emphasized science since its creation almost 1 century ago. Many great discoveries have been made here, and many of the world's greatest minds have studied here, many of whom are among you today. And we at Cerulean Forest Academy pledge ourselves to the further cooperation of our science programs with government to meet the needs of tomorrow.
And there's call for more funding. Maybe he could ask for a gold piece every time he uses the word many. I knew the headmaster wouldn't pass up a chance to make the academy look good, and potentially gain more sponsors in the same speech. The applause camouflaged out my giggles, except to Nadari, who elbowed me. The micro-speeches and introductions continued for several minutes, one professor presenting honorary titles to our president, followed by another appointing him the honorary visiting professor. With all that time spent outside in the early autumn sun, I was thankful for the scattered clouds that had rolled in off the mountains and the cool breeze that carried them. Finally, after yet another speech, the president of Lonatara stepped forward to a sea of clapping hands and cheers. Nadari waved to her relative, but she was obviously lost in the crowd.
Headmaster Districts, Senators Davsta and Nachi, scientists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your gift of having me made an honorary professor, and I hope you don't mind if my first lesson here will be concise.
I tried hard not to crack a smile.
Our civilization has been built upon the ruins of the old. For millennia before us, our world was vastly different. Differences were settled with bows and swords, and then with bombs launched from thousands of leagues away, and then finally with words and without bloodshed. There was a time when sorcery was a common practice, now lost to time, along with many fantastical species that came before. Following the Great Impact, we were all that remained as the sky clouded over with dust and ash. For decades, crops failed, and the weak died in the struggle of the strong to survive. Our fighting for land and resources carried on for centuries in one form or another, with only occasional tense peace to rearm and regroup.
It was a typical history lesson, one I've heard many times in elementary school. There had been a time when castles and princesses were still in fashion. Then an asteroid, and bam! Back to the caves for us. I was about to attempt to take a nap when his next few phrases caught my attention.
55 years ago, we were at war on 2 fronts with our neighboring superpowers. Our entire nation and its allies were fighting for survival over old feuds that nobody could remember. When we were awakened from our trance by a voice from beyond our world. Operation Ricochet was an ambitious plan by the Marsh Kingdom to reflect radio transmissions off our inner moon of Belus to relay orders over the horizon to their soldiers on the move. Their scientists were not the only ones listening to the test broadcast.
I could feel Nadari fangirling next to me as the president spoke aloud the name of our neighboring world.
The scientists of our neighbor world, Shasa, were that day testing their first radio telescope on the surface of their world with the intent to peer past the veil of gases surrounding our solar system. What they heard instead was interference from a corner of the sky that before was silent. It shocked their scientists to know that they were not alone, but not as much as it shocked the people of our world when a month later the Shasans replied. A simple total message, the first 3 digits of pi, rained down as interference on every radio across the planet. The leaders of the nations of Arata thought it was a trick, a distraction, a weapon. But scientists from the Heradian Empire replied on a whim with the next set of 3 digits, and almost immediately, given the scale of our solar system, Another overpowering response was received of the next three in sequence. Our world then knew. We had to accept that we were not alone.
For years I'd studied Shasa, nearly my entire adolescent life. Even as a model, I would dress in costume and makeup to take on the appearance of our aquatic neighbors. The alien species had spent years communicating with us, learning our language and teaching us theirs, to the point where entire conversations could be had. The invention of the television had mainly been spurred on by the dream of seeing the creatures themselves. I can still imagine my grandparents' shock when they saw the first images of the blue-skinned fish people from the stars. They looked like any Aratan, aside from their aquatic features and tails. Their oceanic world also fascinated me and pandered to my love of beaches, where I could oogle all the cute guys. I snapped myself out of my daydreaming and continued to listen in.
It did not take long for the people of this world to see past their differences, to dream beyond the destruction of their neighbors, to instead aspire to a greater goal, to turn their rockets into vehicles of peace and not weapons of war. In recent years, we've made great strides in the fields of exploration. 46 years ago this month, we took our first steps on our inner moon of Bellis. 28 years ago, we arrived on Alars, our outer moon. And this past year saw the completion of our first permanent and collaborative outpost on Bellis. But now it is time to take the next step forward, to vault over the fence separating two worlds, to reinvent the sail to catch solar winds and to traverse the cosmic oceans.
Nadari's dream of building a probe to land on Shasa may soon come true, or perhaps my ambition to study live plants or even frozen animal and fish specimens. The next few words may just be what I'd been waiting to hear all my life.
To this end, and at this time around the world, my colleagues, Her Majesty Queen Catarella Teokia of Marsh, and Prime Minister Farrell Hellowen of Haradi, are announcing to their nations the reformation of their national space agencies into a global cooperative to meet the specific goal of sending a crew of Aratans to the neighboring world of Shasa and returning them alive and well.
The crowd was silent for a moment, and even the wind seemed to still its pace as the true impact of what the president had just said sunk in. Soon the applause and cheers began to build, turning the courtyard into an ocean of jubilation. Nadari was speechless. She simply stared ahead at the back of the man in front of her who had risen to his feet. I could see the gears in her head spin into overdrive as thoughts of the future raced around like moths to a dancing flame. The president tried to continue his speech, but gave up and waited for the cheering and shouted questions to end. I could only catch a few bits and pieces over the roar of excited citizens. I stopped trying as Nadari finally leaned close to speak in my ear. She was practically breathless with excitement as her eyes sparkled.
Hey, Rhea! Got any plans for the next 5 years?